Today we have the pleasure to receive Susan Greenfield in the context of Invest Financial Show in Geneva. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
Susan is professor of pharmacology at Oxford University. She's also a writer and broadcaster. So, Susan, what is exactly the goal of your presence at Invest Financial Show?
Well, I'm very interested to come to a sector that people might not think of as related in any way to brain research. And what I was very excited about doing was exploring with people who are interested in money and therefore the future trends, how the future technology, more particularly the digital world, is changing people's brains. Because if it's changing people's brains and therefore their behavior, then that will change their spending patterns, it will change the way their clients are thinking, and it will change the kind of workforce that they have. So I think that by talking to people in a very different area to one's own, it's always very rewarding and you learn a lot, but I think we have a lot to learn from each other as to how we are going together to shape the 21st century world.
Can you explain maybe more the link between, for example, the changing environment, for example, video games or day-trading, for example?
Yeah, there are some very general applications, but also some very specific ones. So let's take, for example, video games, as you say. Perhaps it's a rather bad lesson to learn, if you play lots of video games, that actions don't have consequences, that you can shoot someone and then very obligingly the next time round they will be undead. The real world doesn't work like this. But nonetheless, if this is your world, if you're playing games obsessively, let's say up to 10 hours a day, that becomes the reality, that becomes the norm. And then when you go into the real world, perhaps you will have a very different attitude to previous generations, and I think it's very interesting. For example, in 2008, when we had the crash, Obama said afterwards that that was due to greed and recklessness of traders. Now it could be that we are fostering a mentality where greed and recklessness is more likely as an outcome with people who are very much in this cyber world than in previous generations. So it may be that some of the things that have happened could be due in part, obviously not a simple relationship, but could be due in part to a different attitude to life and a different way of seeing the world.
And in terms of investment, what can we do and what can be maybe a solution to related to taking risk in an investment, because it's changing now, and the attitude of traders, for example,
Sure.
about risk.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very general question, a very difficult one. Of course, there's no simple answer to that. I think the first thing is to be aware of it as an issue, because some people are still in denial. It's a bit like in the 1950s, when many people were in denial that smoking and cancer were linked. Yeah? I think the first thing is to acknowledge that there is an issue here and to discuss it. Then we have to think, how can we shape an environment that gives people a much richer experience just on this very simple, flat world in which they live? And that's quite a big ask. It depends on the resources and the agenda, but in the financial sector, it may be that people think about how they run their companies in terms of how the office is run, that people aren't digitally connected all the time possibly, that you encourage face-to-face communication much more, that you go for walks. Once I went for an interview with someone and he actually said, let's go for a walk. And we just went for a walk together rather than sitting out the side. And that was very helpful and very nice. And I thought that was a rather effective way of communicating. So I think there's some novel ways we might start thinking, but acknowledging that the younger people especially may have a different attention span. That's already a start if you're aware of that, and then you try to think of ways in which you can improve on that, because we know that the human brain is good at what it rehearses and it's endlessly changing and updating. So if you can devise things for people to do, then they will adapt accordingly. And of course that makes for very interesting new types of products for people to sell as well. Already some of the products out there are crazy. Like I spoke in my presentation about one where called Freedom. It's a service that actually limits the access for you to the internet because people are so addicted. It'd be much nicer if we could think of other types of products that bring out the best in people, make them more individual, more confident in themselves and a bit more social.
Thank you, Susan.
Pleasure.